The Quiet Panic. You guys have been absolutely flooding my comments asking for more stories about mysterious festivals and strange traditions from around the world. Well, I finally found something that's going to make your skin crawl and question everything you thought you knew about ancient customs. This happened to my friend Marcus during what was supposed to be a simple backpacking trip through rural Japan. He was 24, fresh out of college, and had this obsession with finding the most remote, untouched places possible. The kind of guy who would deliberately avoid tourist traps and instead venture into areas where GPS signals died and cell towers were just a distant memory. Marcus had been hiking through the mountains of northern Honshu for 3 days when he stumbled upon something that wasn't on any map. It was late afternoon and the autumn mist was rolling in thick between the trees. He'd been following what he thought was an old hunting trail when he heard it. Music. Traditional Japanese music floating through the forest like it was coming from another world entirely. Now, Marcus wasn't the type to get spooked easily, but something about that music made every hair on his arms stand up. It was beautiful, haunting, but there was something off about it, like the melody was just slightly wrong, played in a key that shouldn't exist. He told me later that it reminded him of a lullaby his grandmother used to hum, except backwards. Following the sound, Marcus pushed through a wall of bamboo and found himself looking down into a valley that definitely wasn't on his hiking map. Below him was a village that looked like it had been frozen in time for centuries. Traditional wooden houses with curved roofs, stone pathways, and paper lanterns swaying gently in the breeze. But here's the thing that immediately struck him as weird. Every single lantern was glowing with this pale blue light instead of the warm yellow you'd expect. The music was coming from the center of the village, where Marcus could see people moving around in what looked like some kind of festival. Colorful banners hung between the buildings, and he could smell incense mixed with something else he couldn't quite identify. Something sweet and cloying that made his stomach turn. Marcus made his way down the steep slope, using tree roots and rocks to keep from sliding. As he got closer to the village, the details became clearer. And that's when things started feeling really wrong. The people he'd seen from above weren't exactly moving like people should move. Their movements were too fluid, too graceful, like they were floating just slightly above the ground. When he finally reached the edge of the village, Marcus hid behind one of the wooden houses and peered around the corner. The festival was in full swing. There were dozens of people dressed in elaborate traditional clothing, masks covering their faces, dancing in slow, hypnotic circles around what looked like a massive sake barrel. But this wasn't any ordinary sake barrel. This thing was easily 10 feet tall and carved with symbols that hurt Marcus's eyes to look at directly. The strangest part was the sake itself. Instead of the clear or slightly cloudy liquid you'd expect, this stuff was glowing with the same pale blue light as the lanterns. And as the villagers danced, they would approach the barrel, fill small ceramic cups, and drink deeply. But here's what made Marcus's blood run cold. After drinking, each person would remove their mask, and underneath their faces were completely blank. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just smooth, pale skin, Marcus told me he stood there frozen for what felt like hours, watching these faceless people dance and drink their glowing sake. The music never stopped, never changed tempo, just kept playing that same haunting melody over and over. And slowly, Marcus began to realize that some of the dancers were looking in his direction, even though they had no eyes to see with. That's when one of them started walking toward his hiding spot. This figure moved differently from the others, more purposefully, more aware. As it got closer, Marcus could see that this person's mask was different too. Instead of the colorful festival masks the others wore, this one was pure white with a single red symbol painted in the center. The figure stopped about 20 feet away and slowly raised one hand, pointing directly at Marcus. Marcus didn't wait to see what would happen next. He turned and ran back toward the slope he'd come down, crashing through bushes and scrambling up rocks as fast as his legs could carry him. Behind him, he could hear the music getting louder, more intense, like the entire village was responding to his presence. But when he reached the top of the ridge and looked back, the valley was completely dark. No lanterns, no music, no village. Just empty forests stretching as far as he could see. He spent the next 6 hours hiking in complete darkness, using his phone's flashlight until the battery died, then feeling his way along tree trunks and hoping he was heading in the right direction. When dawn finally broke, Marcus found himself back on the main hiking trail, exhausted and convinced he'd hallucinated the entire thing. But that's not where this story ends. 3 days later, Marcus made it to the nearest town and decided to ask around about the village he'd seen. Most of the locals just shook their heads when he described it, but one old man at a small restaurant went completely pale when Marcus mentioned the blue sake and the faceless dancers. The old man pulled Marcus aside and told him something that changed everything. He said that 50 years ago there had indeed been a village in those mountains. It was called Keiga no Sato, which roughly translates to Shadow Village. The people there had been known throughout the region for brewing the finest sake anyone had ever tasted. But there was always something strange about that village. Visitors were rare, and those who did make the journey often came back changed in ways nobody could quite explain. According to the old man, the villagers of Kage no Sato had discovered something in the mountain springs they used for their brewing. Something that made their sake more than just rice wine. The locals believed it was a gift from the spirits of the mountain, but others whispered that it was something much darker. The sake didn't just intoxicate, it transformed. And those who drank too much of it began to lose pieces of themselves, starting with their memories, then their personalities, and finally their very faces. The old man went on to explain that one autumn night exactly 50 years ago, the entire village had simply vanished. Search parties found empty houses, cold cooking fires, and not a single living soul. But every year since then, on the anniversary of their disappearance, hikers and travelers reported seeing lights in that valley, hearing music and catching glimpses of a festival that shouldn't exist. Marcus felt his stomach drop as the old man continued. The sake they brewed wasn't meant for the living, he said. It was an offering to something ancient and hungry that lived deep in the mountain. And every year the villagers would hold their festival, hoping to appease whatever force had claimed them. But the psyche still needed to be consumed, still needed to fulfill its purpose. That's when the old man looked Marcus directly in the eyes and asked him a question that made his blood freeze. He asked if Marcus had been offered any of the sake during his visit to the village. When Marcus said no, the old man's expression shifted from concern to something that looked almost like pity, because according to the legend, the festival doesn't end until someone drinks the sake. And if no living person accepts the offering, then the spirits have to find another way to complete their ritual. They have to come looking for the one who witnessed their ceremony but refused to participate. Marcus told me that for the next 2 weeks everything seemed normal. He continued his trip through Japan, visited temples, took photos, ate amazing food, but every night he would hear that music again, faint and distant like it was following him. And in his peripheral vision, he would catch glimpses of pale blue light, always just out of direct sight. But the real terror began when Marcus returned home to the United States. The first few nights back in his apartment, Marcus thought he was just dealing with jet lag. But then he started noticing things that couldn't be explained away so easily. His reflection in the bathroom mirror would sometimes appear slightly delayed, like it was taking a split second longer to mimic his movements. The sake he'd bought at duty-free in Tokyo had somehow turned that same pale blue color, even though it had been perfectly normal when he'd packed it. But the worst part was the dreams. Every single night, Marcus would find himself back in that valley, standing at the edge of the festival. The faceless dancers would turn toward him in perfect unison, and the figure in the white mask would extend a ceramic cup filled with glowing sake. In the dream, Marcus could never move, never run. He would just stand there as the cup got closer and closer to his lips. He'd wake up in a cold sweat, and for just a moment he could swear he tasted something sweet and bitter on his tongue. Something that made his vision blur and his thoughts feel fuzzy, like his mind was trying to slip away from him. Marcus started avoiding mirrors entirely after he caught a glimpse of something that shouldn't have been there. For just a fraction of a second, he saw his own face beginning to smooth out, his features becoming less defined. He blinked hard, and everything was back to normal. But the image was burned into his memory. 3 weeks after returning home, Marcus called me in a complete panic. He said he'd been researching everything he could find about Kaga no Sato, and had discovered something that made his situation infinitely worse. According to the few historical records he could dig up, the village hadn't just vanished 50 years ago. It had been vanishing and reappearing in cycles for centuries, always in the same location, always holding the same festival. The pattern was always identical. Someone would stumble upon the village during their autumn festival, witness the ceremony, but refuse to drink the sake. Within a month, that person would begin experiencing what the old texts called the thinning. Their reflection would start to fade. Their memories would become unclear, and slowly but surely they would begin to lose their identity entirely. Marcus told me he'd already started forgetting things. Simple things at first, like where he'd put his keys or what he'd eaten for breakfast. But then bigger pieces started disappearing. He couldn't remember his college girlfriend's name, couldn't recall his mother's maiden name, couldn't even remember the taste of his favorite childhood candy. The most terrifying part was that he could feel it happening. He was aware that his memories were being drained away, but he was powerless to stop it. It was like watching himself disappear one piece at a time. That's when Marcus made a decision that still gives me chills to think about. He decided to go back. He bought another plane ticket to Japan and started planning a return trip to those mountains. When I asked him why, his answer was simple and horrifying. He said the festival wouldn't stop calling to him until he finished what he'd started. The sake needed to be consumed, and if he didn't drink it willingly, it would slowly consume him anyway. I tried everything to talk him out of it. I offered to go with him, suggested he see a doctor, even considered having him committed. But Marcus was convinced that returning to the village was his only option. He said he could feel himself fading more each day, and at least if he went back, he might have some control over what happened next. The last message I received from Marcus was a text sent from somewhere in the Japanese mountains. It simply said, "Found the valley again. The festival is waiting. If I don't make it back, don't come looking for me. And whatever you do, never drink sake that glows blue." That was 8 months ago, and I haven't heard from him since. His family reported him missing, but the Japanese authorities never found any trace of him in those mountains. It's like he just vanished into thin air, exactly like the villagers of Kage no Sato had done decades before. But here's the thing that keeps me awake at night. Last week I received a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a small ceramic sake cup and a note written in handwriting I didn't recognize. The note said, "Thank you for listening to my story. The festival continues and there's always room for one more observer. Come find us when you're ready to understand what lies beyond the veil of the living world." I threw the cup away immediately, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. Sometimes late at night, I hear faint music drifting through my apartment. Traditional Japanese music played in a key that shouldn't exist, and in the corner of my eye, I catch glimpses of pale blue light that disappears the moment I turn to look directly at it. I'm telling you this story not just because it's terrifying, but because I need you to understand something crucial. There are places in this world where the boundary between the living and the dead becomes thin. Places where ancient rituals continue long after their practitioners have crossed over to whatever comes next. And sometimes just witnessing these ceremonies is enough to pull you into something far darker than you could ever imagine. If you ever find yourself hiking in remote areas and you hear music that sounds like it's coming from another world, turn around and walk away. Don't investigate. Don't let curiosity get the better of you. And whatever you do, never accept an offering from spirits who no longer belong to our realm. Because some festivals are meant only for the dead, and the sake they serve is not meant for the living to taste.